Hello everybody, hope you are doing well. I am in my study in my apartment today, partly because it's raining a lot and I didn't want to have to make the journey into work, so I'm working from home as many people do. This is a background that when I'm on Zoom meetings I think people are horrified by. Actually, they normally can see the other side, what you can't see. But I'm surrounded by gadgets, technology, video games, books, computer parts, basically all sorts of tat, really. Tat or cool things, depending on your persuasion in terms of technology. But I want to talk today about something that's very big news in Hong Kong, and it's taken, I guess it's got a bit of international press as well. That is the amendment to the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. Now, that is Hong Kong's data protection law. One of the first videos I ever did when sort of COVID was just beginning, we're just going to lockdown in Hong Kong, was on this very topic and how it looked like there might be some amendments. And I was very excited because the amendments I thought would be essentially data breach notification, greater penalties in the event of a data breach, essentially making sure that Hong Kong companies get in line with the rest of the world, follow the GDPR and actually having a competent, persuasive and effective data protection law. Well, there is a bill now doing the rounds in terms of amendments to the law. I have read it. It is available on the Privacy Commissioner's website. I will post a link in the video if that actually works, if I can make that work. And I'm afraid it only amends one part of the law, and that is to add a new offence. Now, if you go back to what was going on in Hong Kong in 2019, we had all sorts of, I guess, civil disobedience and protests in terms of an extradition bill, which have now more or less gone away thanks to national security law. I suppose no one would dare protest for fear of facing imprisonment. Fair enough. However, one of the things that was happening during those protests was something called doxing. Now, both sides were doing this, both the pro-government and the anti-government camps. And that doxing, if you don't know what it is, it's the act of maliciously putting someone's personal data online, so leaking something. I have to admit, I've been doxed. I got in a fight with someone on Facebook. I must remember never to argue with people on the internet. And they posted my home address, phone number, and suggested that people phone me up. Clearly, I'm not much of a target because nobody actually phoned me up, so it wasn't very exciting. And I was like, this is a bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. I can just block any numbers that come through. And my address, well, Hong Kong is a pretty safe place, I have to say. However, lots of public figures were being doxed, protesters were being doxed, families were being doxed, policemen were being doxed. It was pretty indiscriminate, to be perfectly honest. And it was announced, I guess, when the national security law in Hong Kong was coming into effect, that a law would come into effect to stop doxing. And those are the amendments to the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. The amendments we have only cover doxing. One of my first criticisms is they haven't dealt with any other of the issues in terms of data security in Hong Kong. They purely cover doxing. And you know what? Fair enough. Doxing is a pretty nasty thing to do. If you're trying to cause someone harm, loss, embarrass them, do something awful by posting their data online, then yes, you should be subject to a penalty for it. Now, the new law brings in a few things, lots of changes, mainly amendments to the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, but also amend penalties for various things too. I'm going to talk about three and what I think the issues we have are and how I hope they're amending them. Or if they do amend them when it goes through the bill's various readings, which I have a feeling they probably won't. Now, the first thing they do is they add this new offence of doxing. So if you publish personal data of an individual with an intent to cause harm, or you're reckless as to whether you cause harm, you can face imprisonment of up to 2 years and a fine. Now that seems okay when you take into account the fact that actually harm doesn't need to be caused. I'm on the fence for this. So if you are reckless as to whether you cause harm to someone by posting their personal data online without their consent, obviously, and they don't suffer any harm, should you face a penalty? It's hard to say. It's also an issue in that we can't really tell how recklessness will be applied or what sort of harm should be suffered. There is a definition of specified harm, but it is very broad. Everything from psychological harm, harm to someone's family, financial harm, and so on, harm to property, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little bit concerned that the penalty is quite high on that one. However, if you intend to cause harm to somebody, and they do actually suffer harm, the penalty goes up. So you face $1 million Hong Kong dollar maximum fine and up to 5 years in prison. Normally I'd be fine with this. I'd be like, well, if someone is actually doing something malicious, so be it. But my concern is that is currently the highest penalty you can get if the personal privacy data ordinance is amended as planned. The only other camp that can essentially suffer the same fate is someone who's essentially stolen someone's data and using it for direct marketing, trying to make some profit off it, and that was amended a few years ago in light of the Octopus scandal. The penalty for someone losing someone's personal data, so essentially for suffering a data breach, is essentially enforcement notice to this day, and if the enforcement notice is not obeyed, then you would face a fine. The fine will be very, very unlikely, if not impossible, to reach the level of fine you would reach by doxing someone. So I'm in two camps. Yes, the amendments are probably necessary, we need to deal with doxing, but then there is a problem in that perhaps it's now disproportionate to the rest of the law. I'm kind of disappointed they didn't amend the rest of it. So that's point number one. The second thing that's interesting is the Privacy Commissioner. I've always complained the Privacy Commissioner has no teeth. The new amendments will give the Privacy Commissioner a lot of teeth. The right to authorise people to be arrested, to be stopped and searched, the right to enter premises, to seize equipment, and the right to issue something called a cessation notice. Now, the personal data privacy ordinance really just applied up till now to Hong Kong. However, the realization is that doxing content, if you're posting someone's personal information online, then you can post it anywhere in the world. So the Privacy Commissioner will be given the power to issue a cessation notice requiring an organisation anywhere in the world to take down that information. If they refuse to do so, if they refuse to copyright, then the staff of the platform behind that, essentially wherever that content is being hosted, may face exactly the same penalty as someone who essentially doxed an individual, published personal information, being reckless or intending to cause harm and no harm was caused. That is up to 2 years imprisonment. That is a bit of a concern. So imagine you work for someone like Google. And someone has used, I don't know, some sort of Google platform, whatever Google platform is, and I'm just picking on Google as an example, and they post doxing content. The Privacy Commissioner asks for that to be taken down, and then essentially says, well, you haven't taken it down, I've given you a notice, you haven't appealed, you've had 14 days, you're facing criminal proceedings. This is an issue. So if you have staff in Hong Kong, if you're an employee of Google, you could then say it's a reasonable excuse to say that you didn't have the power to remove that content, but if the Commissioner does not agree, you could face jail. And this has caused a bit of an uproar with some of the technology companies who together have written to the Privacy Commissioner to essentially say there's an issue with this. The response has to be essentially to add in this, essentially qualifying it if they can only be essentially face prison if they have the power to remove the content. If it's outside of their remit, then they won't. But holding a platform holder responsible for doxing content if they refuse to remove it, where what is defined as doxing content appears to be decided purely by the Privacy Commissioner in Hong Kong, I think could cause a lot of problems. Now, there was big news about a week ago now, today is the 20th of July, but about a week ago when there was an allegation that some of the technology companies would pull out of Hong Kong. Hopefully that's not the case, but we will see. But that is the second issue. The third issue also relates to cessation notices, and this gives the Privacy Commissioner the right to block any content or any platform that may feature doxing content or be alleged to feature doxing content. And this again has now got businesses worried in Hong Kong, because unlike mainland China, we can access Google, YouTube, Facebook, most of the platforms that anyone enjoys anywhere else in the world. We can't actually use TikTok instantly, which is that's probably a topic for another video, but there we go. And that's great. It makes Hong Kong kind of what it is. It's always been this outpost of China, where it has both East and West values and East and West meets. But if those platforms were blocked as a result of doxing, or if the new doxing offence was used as an excuse to block those platforms, effectively bringing the Great Firewall down from China over Hong Kong, it would pose massive problems for businesses who are so used to depending on those services. Hong Kong is a real hotbed for sort of entrepreneurial freelancers doing their own thing, a lot of them working off platforms such as Slack, Google Docs, probably not Facebook, but certainly even things like Twitch, Instagram, certainly a lot of the influencers. It would create a lot of difficulty for them. And for me, no Google Maps in Hong Kong means that I never get anywhere because I'm notorious for getting lost. So those are the big three things. My takeaway is that I believe, yes, we need a doxing offence. I still think we need to amend the rest of the law to bring the penalty into line. My concern is that people will be held responsible for doxing content who are not responsible, or that the penalties will not be applied equally. For example, if I would hope everyone, regardless of their political allegiance, is held responsible if they post doxing material. We'll have to see. But my worry most is that the powers that are granted to the Privacy Commissioner may be used indiscriminately, and that, I hope, would not be the case. The Privacy Commissioner at the moment is pretty toothless, suddenly gets massive fangs, but if it is, I think it will harm Hong Kong's competitiveness. Now we'll have to see how it happens. The readings of the bill start this week. It's presented to LegCo tomorrow. I have written to LegCo to basically voice some of my concerns in this as a data lawyer, saying that essentially I think I'm echoing what the technology companies have said, that we do need some rules to prohibit doxing, effective rules, more effective than we have now, and proper penalties, but we need to be very careful that this does not impact on freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. For example, one of the questions I've asked is what happens to journalists if a journalist, for example, posts that an individual was at an event that they shouldn't be at, and that could necessarily include personal data. Would that be considered doxing? Could the journalist face jail? I don't think they should. I'm sure there are plenty of people who think perhaps they should, but we'll have to see. But it's an interesting one. It's the first, I think I'd say it would be the strictest anti-doxing law in the world as and when, and I'm sure it will come in. It'd be interesting to see if anyone follows suit. But most interesting, I think, will be how it is applied, as laws often are. Anyway, that's it from me for now. I'll be back when the law actually passes to see what it actually looked like. I mean, it's a bill now, and it's a law. Maybe it'll be quite different. Certainly it's changed from the consultation paper to the bill. Originally you had to prove psychological harm. They've taken that requirement away, even though I said just define it, but we'll see. Never mind. Now any harm is sufficient. But we'll see how it looks when it comes through. In the meantime, have a good one, and I'll be back very soon. Take care.